This is Breaking MedTech. I am Ryan. That is Cope. And today we are going to talk about how CEOs and or founders of small medtech companies and even big companies need to lead the charge when it comes to sales and marketing. Why, Cope?
I agree. Well, because there's nobody that knows the product theoretically, the product better. There's nobody that is more of an evangelist in some cases. Oftentimes they're the founder, CEO, and inventor, right? And their enthusiasm and leadership is contagious and keeps them locked in and in the game too as to what customers are potentially actually saying in these interactions. Would be my Ryan. That would be my perspective on it. What's your sense of it? Like, talk to me. You have a couple of good bullet points, I think. But
yeah. So my big one was if your CEO or founder is not involved in shaping the message, telling the story, driving commercial momentum, everything slows down, right? Founders typically have a sense of urgency when things are happening. And if you don't have a founder who's like the face of the company, maybe you have a co-founder, maybe it's like second in command who's doing it. But you need someone who, like that number one, number two, who's leading the charge. Because if you have a founder who's just, I would almost say think the description of like Mark Zuckerberg or anyone who's ever seen The Social Network, and he's just like in his room, like just typing away and not really involved in the beginning of it. If that's like, for most companies, if that's what your founder is doing, they're just designing stuff or not involved, or they're just delegating to a whole bunch of other people, usually doesn't go well. Okay. Or it's slow. Maybe it goes well. It eventually goes well, but it's a lot slower than if someone's taking charge.
And for every Zuckerberg example, you can say, well, he was sitting in his room and they were pretty successful, weren't they, Ryan? You could say, yeah, but there's like 10,000 that try to do the same thing, wear the same hoodie, do the same thing, and crater, and you don't know about them. That's what's the old bias of, well, you only see the success, so you think that's what the success is. Well, it's not.
It's my feeling about logos. Nike has a great logo. Do they, or are they just Nike? All right, so
okay.
First talking point. So I have a couple talking points here. First talking point was founder sets the pace. And I don't think if you've worked for a small company or even a big company, if you have a founder who, like, Steve Jobs is always the one who everyone always points to, of like, he was kind of a psycho, because he was, but like he set the pace of like, this is what we're doing, this is what we're like. There was no question what Apple was doing. Everybody was aligned, and he was pushing them forward as fast as possible.
Right.
Do you feel like, I could think of a couple examples where people aren't doing that, or that.
Right. Well, I think. Look, the CEO founder is by de facto a leader.
Yeah.
And people are going to key off their leader. I mean, that's the essence of Homo sapiens, right? So when you have a founder that is leading the charge from the front, making decisions, that the decision part is one of it. But we're talking about actually being out with the sales and marketing, understanding what's happening with customers, with the people, their 1099s or their reps that are integrating and talking with customers every time. Like when you see, and there's a perfect example you brought up beforehand that we'll talk about. When you see the CEO, founder, inventor of a retractor company, the guy who created his own retractor because he's a military surgeon, and he's at the booth and he's interacting with surgeons and he's talking to them. There's no question, if you're a sales agent or for that company, there's no question that guy's bought in. He's out in front, and he's not some guy sitting somewhere that nobody talks to. He's actually leading the charge. And that engenders loyalty, but it also engenders great on the ground real time feedback for that leader. Now, they may not always take it or accept it, nor should they sometimes, but they're right there at the bleeding tip of the spear. And that the things that you get out of that are an organization who believes sales and marketing is important and then can drive it, and the founder's right there in the foxhole with them. Right? Why don't you use the example we were talking about?
No, and I guess, but my only other talking point I was going to say was, I was talking, I don't know, a couple weeks ago with a CEO of a small company, and he was being, he was nervous because they were waiting on a couple things about their go-to-market strategy of creating attention and driving attention, doing all of that right now. He asked me if he was being passive. I was like, oh, yeah, a little bit, right? And it's that what he was doing, I told him it wasn't right. I told him it was wrong. I said, hey, here's just what you're going to see, right? If you're passive about your go-to-market strategy, things are just going to go a little bit slower. But that's your decision. You're the founder. You're the CEO. So I think that's the real thing when it comes to setting the pace is there is no right or wrong with setting the pace. It's just if you're not pushing the ball forward with setting the pace, then things are going to go a little bit slower. And then the only person that you have to blame if you have investors, like if you're bootstrapped, that's all up to you. It doesn't matter, right? If you have investors that you owe money to and they're going like, why aren't we moving faster? Why aren't we moving faster? There's only one person who really it falls to. It's the person in charge, right?
Right.
I don't know if you've ever read Jocko Willink's book of like extreme ownership, or all of his leadership books. It's like it's one person's fault, right? It is the leader's fault. So, the other big thing in this one is the one that you were touching on. Talking point 2 was no one knows the product or problem better, right?
Right.
So you and I were talking about there's a company called ASR. Mm-hmm. You worked with them. I never really sold their product. I am very familiar with it. My father sells their product. And their founder is a former military surgeon. He's now just he's still in the, do we call them civilian? He was active, former military. He's a trauma surgeon. And Bookwalter retractors, for anyone who's ever seen them, look like I don't know how to say it, just 100 pounds of steel.
Yeah.
They're just heavy, large, take a lot of time to set up. And he was like, this sucks. I need to design something better.
Well, and he needed it because he was deploying it in the field with patients that are gunshot wound and hand grenade and IED wounds where they needed rapid access to save lives, and they needed to be able to deploy it in forward settings, I think is the cool military term they use. But it's, I think, a total of 10 parts versus probably 60 in a Bookwalter. Bookwalter's built for surgery. This is built for rapid deployment, access, and like real-time surgery in the field.
Yeah.
In the emergency department of trauma facilities where patients are coming in from knife and gunshot wounds, and you don't have time to get into the OR. You got to get to the bleeder and stop it now. So it's not a replacement for the Bookwalter. It's like its distant cousin that does something completely different in a completely different design. And to his ever-loving credit, that surgeon inventor is manning the booth. He's doing not what I would consider sales calls, but he's on sales calls, answering questions, bringing credibility, because he can say, I designed this to solve my problems, And you may have those problems too. And we watched it. Trauma surgeons turn and go, oh my gosh, yeah, we have, because they're kindred.
Yeah.
They're actually peers.
Yeah.
Right? He's extremely effective. And he also gets to hear what people get confused about or pricing, or it's really interesting to watch.
Yeah. I mean, it's like one of those, and it affects product development because he's out there and he's actually talking to people. He's leading the charge. He's hearing people go, I think they have lighted blades now.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah, because they probably heard it from 10 or 12 customers.
Yeah, he's probably like, and it's, the funny part is like, because he's leading the charge, because he's involved in that, my guess, I'm going to, again, I would have to ask somebody about this, would be like, he probably heard like 10 or 12 people say it in person and was like, oh, that's a good idea. Which it's not like if 10 or 12 sales reps said it to him that he wouldn't listen to them. But there is something where they're involved in the conversation and he's hearing it firsthand. It just adds a little bit level of credibility. Totally. And he also sets, that specific situation, which I think applies to a lot of small medical device companies. They set, like, they know the problem. They can help with the messaging. They can talk about it, right? I was listening to Devin Reed, who is the former content, chief of content or director of content for a long time ago for Gong. So Gong Labs. Mm-hmm. And he was a sales rep before he was there in their marketing department. And he was like, it was easy for me. I was marketing to myself. I knew what I cared about. I knew how I described the problem. I knew what it felt like. And there's a certain benefit to having someone in the room when you do that, right? Yeah. Number 3, which I actually think is the most important thing, which is culture follows the founder. So we were joking about Minnesota football coach PJ Fleck, who everybody makes fun of because
they shouldn't, but they do.
They do,
and we all understand why.
He's a bit over the top, but yeah. And his whole thing is like row the boat, okay? And the idea is that everybody needs to be rowing the boat moving forward. Because I don't know if you like watching rowers. I went to school in Philly, so watching rowers on the river is one of the more impressive things you ever see because everything they do is in unison and there's a very good concept there, right? And that is, if your founder is not involved in the process, they're not leading the charge, and it's like sales and marketing fighting with everybody else, where it's well, we're supposed to be doing this. Yeah, but we can't do that because of it's very difficult when it's coming from a sales leader to convince somebody in regulatory or quality or operations or legal or whatever to do something. But when it comes from the CEO, they get final say, right? And
things tend to happen.
Yeah, the CEO or the founder can make sure that everybody's rowing the boat, and that's as important when you have 3 people. And as important when you have 100 people. I mean, what did you said? Was it Globus? Mm-hmm. Who said you're not a real company?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember when David Paul, the founder, said to me, because we were embroiled in some lawsuits, and I remember the company was still young, and I remember saying to David, like, aren't we nervous? I know I was, right? And David laughed. He said, come on, Cope, you're not a real company until you've been sued. And I remember laughing and going, wow. But I remember calming down.
Yeah.
I remember going like, oh. So it seems like it's all part of the expected plan. I don't know. I'll follow him, right? Like, I'd never been through that before. And I have learned that to an extent that's the case. And I've said it to others and not as a leader, but I've said to other smaller companies, I'm like, hey, listen, just so you know. And they're like, yeah, okay. That you can tell they take some comfort from it because, this is business in the United States. But I do think like anything, I've worked for at least a couple companies I can think of where you don't always necessarily agree with the leader, but the most important thing is who the leader is and what he or she is driving and telling you, so that you can PJ Fleck row in at the same time, same tempo. And it is important. And I do think that leads to like that. We want that leader to lead. And part of that is being decisive. And I think one of the cool things I learned with small med device companies relative to this is you're going to make mistakes. Don't like make decisions, attack your choice, just attack it. And then quickly you'll find out if you were right or wrong or close or way off, but you can quickly pivot, and you sort of have to assume you're going to be wrong at least 50% of the time, right? But if you can get it, so I think that's one of the things that I've always liked about working with small med devices. A CEO, particularly the ones you find that are at the booth in customer engagements, that I can take a customer over to and introduce to, and they're listening, and they don't always have to agree. They don't always have to act. But man, you feel like you're in the boat with PJ rowing at the same time, baby. And like
they're the coxsman. Is that the person at the front of the boat?
I think it's coxswain, isn't it?
Coxswain? Okay.
Yeah.
That makes more sense.
Considering everybody on the planet seemed to read Boys in the Boat, we should know.
I didn't. So
you're the one.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, so I think anybody that understands the key that we like is CEOs don't. God knows you don't want them spending all their time out in the field, but spending a healthy amount of time and leading on this, even if they make decisions the sales and marketing team don't like.
Yeah,
you're still leading.
You're still leading.
That's valuable. Yeah.
And you can, a couple things that I'll just to close this up. You can't delegate belief. So, like, if you're going to put someone else in charge, you better make sure that whoever you're putting in charge is aligned with who you are as a founder. So let's say, I do think once you get to a certain point as a founder, it's kind of hard, like you said, to be involved in everything. But with that being said, whoever you're putting then to kind of lead the charge on a day-to-day basis better have the same beliefs as you. And you better let them make decisions to do not be a Monday morning quarterback. I heard a story the other day of a sales team who was working for like 3.5 weeks on a presentation, and the general manager of that group specifically came in like 2 hours before the presentation was about to go up and was like, I don't really like this. And they had like been absent for meetings for like a month. Like you can't do that, right?
No.
You either let your team, because you don't know the nuanced conversations, you don't know all the other things that happen. So like if you're going to be involved, you have to be involved. If you're not going to be involved, delegate someone else to be involved and trust their decisions. And it also helps with, your founder being on LinkedIn. We talked about in the past, being involved in content early on. The goal would be, if you're involved in content, your schedule is very busy. How do you make it as easy as possible? Dave Gerhardt, who I talked, about before, Dave Gerhardt talks about when he was with one of his companies, their CEO didn't have a lot of time. So Dave would sit down with him for 30 minutes, go to his office, sit down with them. They would turn on they would record something. It'd be like their weekly podcast, but Dave did everything to prepare for that meeting, and all the CEO had to do was sit down for 30 minutes. So if you want to do stuff like that, you just have to find a team who helps you do stuff like that. But you're still leading it. You're the face of the company. You're leading the charge. Everybody's rowing in the same direction. And if you do that and you're decisive, I find it hard to believe that companies that are like that and are decisive and actually, let's assume, actually solve a real problem and aren't the dude from Firefest, you're going to be successful. But if you're just no, we'll get to it. We'll figure it out. This will happen eventually. It's not your thing. Yeah. So,
and by the way, your people want to be led.
Yeah, people love to be led. So,
yeah,
we good?
I think we're good. I think this has been Breaking MedTech. And we'll talk to you next week.
See ya.